Hello and welcome to Passion4Moms webinar series. We are enjoying this new series that we've started highlighting mothers as leaders. And what a joy it's been just to be able to get to know different moms and share them with you and really just explore how we as moms are the leaders of the future. And Passion4Moms is passionate about equipping moms to raise world changers with grit and with grace. And today we have with us Kristi Hayes, and she is going to tell us about a ministry that she has started and what is going on in her world, how many kids she has. And so I'm going to get Kristi on the screen right now. And Kristi, are you there?
I am here.
Hello and welcome, Kristi Hayes. I was just telling our audience that we've started a new webinar series highlighting moms as leaders. As I believe you had shared with me a passion that we as moms have the opportunity to instill in our kids the opportunity to be world changers. At Passion4Moms, we really encourage just to raise our kids with a lot of grace, but also grit and resiliency. And especially in this time of quarantine, we've all hopefully learned how to have a little bit more grit in our lives. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about who you are, how old your kids are, and go ahead and share with us about the ministry that you have started.
Yeah, so my name is Kristi Hayes, and I am a wife to Grant, and I have two kiddos, Holden, who is 11, and Carter Mae, who is 8. And we are actually living in Denver for about 10 more days, and then we are moving to Waco, Texas. So nothing like moving during a pandemic, for sure. I do not...
You have your hands full for sure.
Oh my gosh, you should see my, literally, you'll see people like coming, if you could see on my porch, because we are like selling everything and giving everything away. And so I'm just like, come to the porch, it's there. So we started a company about 3 years ago called BeStrongStory. And basically it all started from a Lunchbox Note that my husband wrote my son. It said 3 phrases: be strong, protect the weak, love everyone. And Holden was having some trouble on the playground with a friend who just wasn't very kind. It's kind of breaking his little heart. And so that was what he wrote for him, just to be encouraged and to just know that he could be strong in who he is, who God made him, who if someone said something different about him, that he wouldn't believe that. He would believe who he is, who we say he is, who God says he is. So basically our company was started from a Lunchbox Note, and that is kind of interesting because you just don't usually hear that. And so we really want to inspire families. Right now, what we do is there are a few ways that we share that message. We want to share that message with others. So one of the ways is we started a podcast called Be Love, and we share stories of those who are living out love in incredible ways. So that inspires the listener to live out their way of love, because everyone has different gifts. Everyone has different talents. You don't have to do it my way. You don't have to do it your way. That we're living out love in like a way that fits us. Another thing that we do is we serve with families monthly. So we go on these Be Strong Story family service projects, because my goal and dream is that we teach our kids young that serving and loving others and building kinship, not just serving, but having a friendship with people who are different from us, is a huge, huge deal. And then we just wrote our first children's book that I hope is an actionable step, that parents can read this book and hear these phrases and say, how can we live this out in our family? And so those are kind of the ways that we are doing it. We started as an apparel company. If you look at my t-shirt, you can kind of see, and we work with a homeless shelter, and that has been my greatest joy. But we're kind of going into some online. We do another thing that we just started this year is family coaching. And I like to say family journeying because I don't have it all down, but we're just journeying with other families to love and serve others. So we teach on certain topics like, you know, how to make a family mission. That's a big deal to us. And how do we live that out? How do we serve others? That's a topic. The love languages. How do you know your kids' love languages so that you can serve them and then they can serve others? So those are some of the different things that we're doing, and we're just having a great time.
Something you just said, I'm thinking as moms are listening to this, or maybe even some dads are tuning in, how amazing the impact that came from just writing on a napkin a note of encouragement to your son, and just again, the value and voice that we have as parents to speak life and speak truth into our kids' lives. And so I just look at the company that you guys have started out of just being intentional to speak life and truth into our kids' lives. Can you give us maybe another example or something of ways that you've been able to foster that with your children? Because, you know, one of the things I've noticed over the last several years in working with parents is, and a lot of it can be blamed on a lot of different areas, maybe that we've had a lot of helicopter parenting, or, you know, millennials have been labeled with being lazy and not resilient. And it's true. There's a lot of research that goes behind that, of suicide rates being high and a lack of resiliency. And because we don't know how to handle failure, we don't know how to handle hurt, we don't know how to handle disappointment. And so what I hear you saying a lot of, you know, even from that Lunchbox Note, is you're teaching your children how to have grit and resiliency and not let another kid on the playground define how they respond or how they see themselves. So what does that look like in your home with your kids?
Yeah, I think it's speaking over them. I think, you know, many times when we go to school, before they get out of school, I'm just telling them who they are. Carter Mae, you are brave, you are kind, you are sweet, you are loving. I mean, it's literally just saying those things over and over and over to them. And you're not, you know, saying something that's not honest. Like, if they are those things, you want to say those things to them so they start to believe it. I was on a podcast with an interview of one of the guys from New Amsterdam, the show New Amsterdam. He's an actor on there, and he's very close with his mom. And I asked him, what is it that made you and your mom so close? Because now he's, you know, in his 30s and he's still close. And he said, because she told me who I was all the time. And I started to believe it. Wow. And so for us, it's me telling them who they are, but it's also what you said about building grit. Like with our kids, like you want to shield your kids from pain, right? And I really want to figure out how to walk through it with them. And if there's something that happens at school, like, I'm not the one who maybe calls the teacher and says this. I really want them to advocate for themselves. Right. And so maybe they're the ones who are calling the teachers, or we've been working on this with Holden. He's 11, and he had some things that, you know, the teacher said he didn't turn in or whatever, and he did. And he's like, Mom, can you handle that? And I'm like, no, I can't. I was like, it's your thing, so you're going to handle it. And he was so nervous. And now at the end of the year, his teacher said that he is one of the best advocators for himself in the whole class. Like, he knows how to advocate for himself. And I want them to learn that. So I want to raise these independent kids that can advocate for themselves and then be strong in who they are. So when other people say, I mean, we're 40 years old, 45, you know, we are still hearing things about ourselves, whether it be online or something someone said to us years ago that is still attached to us. Right. I mean, how many women and moms do you hear, like, whatever their mom said to them when they were 12, or a bully said to them, those are still attached to them. I know I still have things like that. And so I want my kids to know that those labels that other people put on them is not to be attached to them. Like, who they are is who they are, and they're worthy and valuable and loved. And they need to know that, because there are going to be things that people say about them. And so I'm just trying to teach them that at a very young age. So when they're my age and they hear a bunch of nonsense, they are like, no, that's not true. I'm this. And that's hard to do. We're still working on it, you know, our age.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I think that's one of the things that we've tried to do practically in our home as well, is, you know, the foundation is knowing exactly who and whose you are in Christ. Because when we find our identity in Christ, it's not, I mean, we tell our kids all the time, it's not that you're not going to experience failure. You're not good at everything in life. None of us are. We're not perfect. And so how do you navigate not letting your identity being lost in walking through trials? because I think trials and learning that grit and resiliency allows us to be stronger. But also, I think another thing I would love to hear your perspective on, it allows us to be stronger, but it also allows us to be empathetic. And one of the things that I'm very passionate about is servant leadership, because there are a lot of leaders in the world that are very narcissistic. And there's a lot of leaders that have a lot of pride. There's a lot of leaders that have a lot of, just that chip on their shoulder. And another thing that I really want to foster in my girls is how to be intentional leaders with that strong identity and that grit and resiliency, and yet having a tender, humble servant leadership side of them. What do you think are some ways, and you have a son, so how do you build that strong son that's a man, and yet having a tender, compassionate of, even on that playground, being empathetic to the person that was challenging him of whatever that looked like?
Yeah. So I will say I'm very blessed with a son who's already very tender. Like his heart is very tender anyway. So I want to foster that and make sure he keeps that when maybe the world says you need to be tougher, you need to be, stronger. He has a tender heart. And so for us, it is helping them. I think when we help our kids navigate the pain, that's when their empathy blossoms. So for instance, like Holden, he knows what it feels like to be left out. He knows what it feels like to be the new kid. So now he is searching for that. So now I'm encouraging him, you know what that feels like. Like, you know what it felt like. So his empathy is so much more because he knows he went through those things. It's like when we go through grief and pain, we're like, why did that happen? But if we really think about it, the openness in our heart to now reach out to people that we may never have reached out to because we didn't share that. Now we share it. And so I think there's a phrase that I say to my kids every day, and it's eyes wide, light shine. And basically it's just keeping our eyes wide open to others around us. So before you sit down to eat lunch, before you play on the playground with your friends, make sure you're scanning to see if there's anyone else who needs you.
So good. Yeah.
And it's for us too, right? So like if I'm have a lot of friends and then I see a new person walk in, a new mom come into a group, I need to be recognizing that. Like instead of being on my phone or being all awesome with my friend, having the greatest time with my friends, like I need to scan the room and see, is there anyone who I can tell feels not a part? And then I need to bring them in. Like that's something we need to be doing as women, as men. So I just want to teach that to my kids. And back to your failure part, I think as parents, it's very important for us to talk to our kids about our failure. I tell my kids every day, you don't know how many no's I get every single day, whether it's asking for someone to be on a podcast, to not selling as many books as I wanted, whatever. Like I tell them those things. I'm like, mom fails every day with something, but as Carter Mae says, failing makes a stronger mom. And I don't know that she gets that completely yet, but she's hearing it enough that it's starting to stick a little bit. So the empathy piece for me too is the big part. And I think when anyone asks me like, how do we open our heart to others? My heart was not open to others 7 years ago. It was open to some, but it wasn't open to everyone. And now it's open to everyone because I understand, first of all, that I have to get in places that people are different than me and hear their stories. And then it makes me empathetic because if I don't know someone else's story, it's hard for me to, understand. Now I know their story and it's not just a newspaper article about a certain person. I know that person. And so that's what I'm so passionate about, is getting our kids in different environments with different diversity and different people whose backgrounds are different, so their heart can open to those persons as well.
What happened 7 years ago that was so life-altering for you to see the world differently?
Well, we did a Lent at our church, and Lent, I've never done Lent before. It's, we're evangelical. You don't really hear that much. It's, more Catholic. And so we did this Lent practice where basically, instead of giving up something like chocolate or, you know, whatever the thing, he worded it in a way that he said, if there's anything in your heart that is not of God, pluck that out. That's the thing that you get rid of. And at the time, I was in youth ministry. I was coaching like a basketball team for Youth for Christ. I was doing all the things, like all the very good things. And so my arrogant mind was like, well, what in the world is God going to find in there that's not of him? I do my quiet time. I go to church, you know, all the things. And God was like, you do all those things, but you don't do them for me. You do them for you. And so they look really good, but you do them so people will tell you you're awesome. That's why you do them. And I was like, no, that's not why. And it's absolutely why. It was not, I mean, not that it was all jaded and that I did everything for pride, but that was a huge thing. And so, literally God just said, I'm kind of all or nothing girl. And he said, quit everything, quit. We had another company that was working with Compassion International that we had just started. I mean, I was doing all the right things. And I was like, well, God, who will take care of the children if I don't do it? And he's like, I don't need you. Like, I need you with a good heart, but I don't need you with a prideful heart. And so I quit everything. And that was the worst for a dreamer, for an entrepreneur, for my personality to not be doing something. Right. Is the worst. And so anyway, I just sat with him for literally, I think it was 8 months. And it was to the point where God was like, if I never give you anything to do again, to dream, to go after, would you be satisfied in just being with me? And I was like, no, I wouldn't. And so that, until I was satisfied with that, until I could really say like, yep, if you never give me anything to do again, anything to lead or be passionate about, I will be passionate in you. And that's when I was able to dream again. And so I really asked God to just open my heart to others. Like, you know, you hear the cliche statement, like, make my heart break for what breaks out, you know, after God's. And everyone says that. And I probably said it before, but I really meant it this time. Mm-hmm. And so God was like, okay, get ready. And now I'm like, anything, it was so weird. Like empathy, I have empathy, but when you do like personality tests, I'm actually very low. I'm like a guy, like I actually very much test like a man. Mm-hmm. And my empathy, I'm telling you, it's just different. But now I'm also in relationship with those who are different, where, you know, we go to the homeless shelter every week. We are in relationship with refugees. We are, you know, I made it a point to make sure that our family was in relationship with others who are different. And there's nothing that can change you more than being in a friendship with someone whose life experiences are different. Because I will never understand what it means to be abused as a child. I will never understand what it means to not know where my kids are going to get food the next day. I'll probably never have to deal with that. But some of my friends do deal with that. And man, that just breaks me. So I think that was kind of my come to Jesus, if you will, moment.
Yeah, that's so good. And one of the things that I am convicted of a bit, you know, you summed up so beautifully, is often when you read through scripture, God was constantly getting onto the Pharisees, because it wasn't that they weren't doing good. It wasn't that they didn't have all the right answers, but they didn't have the heart that Jesus was looking for. And so how often we can become very prideful and arrogant in doing good and you know, whatever that good looks like, but getting the praise from man rather than having our hearts pure before God. But I love what you pointed out also, in how we as parents can really have tangible opportunities for our children to learn how to ask what another person's story is, because I think that also removes so much judgment and arrogance in us when, you know, it's when we don't take the time to learn other people's story that we assume, we judge, we write our own narrative of either why they behave that way, why they, you know, act that way. And yet taking just a little bit of time goes a long ways of being able to just learn where they're coming from. And it provides so much more empathy when
we don't have the answers, when we
yeah,
do not have the answers. Like that was, we think we have all the answers, and
absolutely.
we're like, oh, if you do this, then you'll be better. Well, how do I know? Because I'm not in their shoes. I remember a conversation I had with the homeless shelter that we go to, and I had all these grand ideas, like we're going to come in, we're going to provide these jobs, and we're going to do this, and blah, 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 blah. And the guy who runs, he's very blunt, and I love him so much. And he's like, I love your ideas. They're great. He's like, but that's not going to work here, number one. And he goes, and number two, your job is not to come in here and fix people. He goes, your job is to come in here and love people, period. And that's very hard for a fixer. It's very hard for someone who was brought up a certain way that believes, I've had to really switch all that I believe. Even when I was in DC, working on the Hill, like you are in this bubble and you don't see what you have this way that you think. But then when you actually go out into the real world and have relationships with people, you're like, ooh, wait a second. Like, that's not going to work for that. You have these relationships. And so that is what has changed me completely. And quite honestly, helping us as those of faith to love with no agenda. Like, can I go into a homeless shelter and love and maybe get spit on because they're having a bad day? Am I going to stop loving because they didn't thank me and tell me how awesome I was because I came in and served them today? I mean, I think that's where we get it wrong. And this is what I have to always, tell the people that we serve with. I'm like, you might not feel fuzzy after you serve today. And actually that's okay. Like you're not serving to feel that. Many of us will, and that's the beauty of serving. It's so awesome that you feel so good when you give, but there are some times that serving is really messy and sacrificial. And are you still going to do it if you don't get the return that you thought you might? And that's something that, I think it'll be a journey forever. But yeah, it's always
having that heart check too, of whether it's ministry or whatever it is. Why are we doing what we're doing? Totally. Are we doing it simply to get pats on the back or to build a name or to, get accolades from other people? Or are we doing it regardless of what happens because that's what God's called us to do? And it doesn't matter what attention we do or don't get.
Right. It's open. So 8 years ago, my hands were closed. Like if you would have taken ministry from me or speaking engagements or whatever, I would have that was my identity. Like, the accolades were my identity. Whereas now I have to remember to do this because this will be this will be the thorn in my side always. And I'm very honest about that. But now my hands are open wide, where if he took everything, I still have him. Now, does that mean every day I think like that? No. But does it mean that I know my triggers now to know, ooh, how's my heart on this? Why am I doing this? And the more honestly we read about in scripture, like I'm reading right now just about, Jesus like loved the outcasts. Like that's who he wanted to hang out with, the outsiders, and like not the Pharisees. Like he wanted to hang out with people who no one wanted to hang out with. And so I even wrote in my journal, like, who are those people in my life right now? Who are the people that no one wants to hang out with, that even maybe the Christian community has, gives you kind of a side eye if you're loving them. And so I just wrote all those out, and I was just talking to Grant. I was just like, it's amazing to me. Like Jesus loved the outcasts and the sinners, and that is who we are to be to others. And so anyway, you can get me on a tangent on that, but.
No, that's so good. And I think that that's something that, Christians do not model very well. Normally we're quick to judge as a Pharisee, but we're not quick to love as Jesus modeled for us. What are some of the ways, Kristi, that you are able to create rhythm in your life of spending time with Jesus? Because obviously you're in the middle of, all of our kids are home during this quarantine time. Whatever ages and stages they are. You in particular, in between moving from Colorado to Texas. So what is it that provides some stability and rhythm for you to be intentional in your time with Jesus? Because I think that's something that a lot of moms in particular can really struggle with, because the busyness of life can be all consuming, but we have to make time for what's important to us.
Right. And I've kind of written on this, like, what are the non-negotiables during quarantine for me? Because our schedule is so crazy. So you're trying to run a business. I'm on a Zoom call with you, but my kids are on Zoom calls, you know, in the other room. And, you know, we're trying to move and all those different things. But the things that I really said were my non-negotiables during quarantine were time I spent in the morning. And that's something I've done for probably the last 3 years. And I always heard when people like wake up before their kids and have quiet time, I was like, that is not for me. Like, I am not a morning person. Like, I'm not doing that. Like, good for them, but I will not be that person. And I don't know, something switched in me where I just decided, like, I'm going to get up an hour earlier before my kids and I'm going to have that time. And it has been the greatest, and I'm not a morning person. It has been the greatest joy of my life. And so the non-negotiables for me to kind of keep in our rhythm, as well as just keep me taking care of myself, is waking up early in the morning and going outside. We have a porch here in Colorado, going out and reading. And that's my thing. That's my quiet time. I have a couple of devotionals that I love. I have a new Lectio app that I'm using that this British man speaks, you know, scripture over me. I love it. And then working out for me is a big deal. So every day at the exact same time I work out, like, non-negotiable. My kids know that. Like, unless you're dying, don't come in here. That's kind of and just putting those expectations for your kids. Like, so we made a schedule, and I'm not even a scheduled person. I don't even love like schedule. But we made a schedule that says, this is what our days look like. This is when mom's working. This is when you're working. And it just gave expectations for our kids. So I think that really helped me and is helping me now. I mean, we're in the middle of a move and that's still happening. I'm still doing those two things of quiet time and getting my workout in every day. And that's probably going to keep me sane.
Well, I think even for people who don't love schedules, just having some structure to their day, it allows, I think, also feelings of safety and security for our kids, knowing what to expect. And I think that that gives them something, a safe feeling, knowing that that's what mom's doing every morning. That's how she starts her day. And it kind of helps them wake up and have some normalcy and
totally.
Yeah, structure and safety. But also, I love what you pointed out, that they know that that's what you're doing. You're spending time with Jesus in the morning. And I think that when we model for our kids, you know, one of the things that we've done with our girls ever since they were super little is encourage them and taught them how to have Jesus time. And so, and I don't really like the whole quiet time thing. I feel it brings back, you know, kind of too much legalistic mentality. Yeah. But Jesus time, spend time with Jesus, whatever that looks like. And now, you know, where we can all do that individually as well as corporately, but having that be a priority in all of our lives, because we're all going to be busy. One of my absolute favorite heroes and examples, which I know you'll appreciate, is when President George W. Bush was in office, and how it was known that he made time to spend time in the Word. And I was like, if he can spend time in the Word every day, there is no excuse for any of us. Right. And that was just a, you know, tangible example for me of putting priorities in place. But then as we do that for our kids, modeling so that they grow up knowing my mom spent time with Jesus every morning, and that was part of her rhythm and routine. I love that.
Yeah. My mom did that. I mean, and she got up at like 5 a.m. and did that. And she never like said, you have to do this, or come and hear what I'm learning. Or I just knew she did that. And I didn't pick that up until I was, you know, 40 or 38. You know, I didn't pick that same rhythm. I had other rhythms. And I love also to teach my kids, like, what I love to do. I love to journal and to read. It might be different than what you love to do with Jesus. Like, maybe you love to be out in nature and you love to pray, or you love to sing. Like, there are so many awesome things that you can do to spend time. So I love that you said Jesus time, because I think it just gives them, when you start to figure out their temperament and their love languages and what works for them, like, you get to say, you don't have to do it this certain way. You don't have to read 17 scriptures and then pray at this time. You
Right.
get to do it the way God wired you.
Yeah, because I think when we start putting too many rules and regulations on what our time with the Lord looks like, it loses the joy, it loses the relationship part. And, you know, you and I both know that it's a relationship. It's not a religion. It's a relationship with Jesus. And so fostering in our kids a love to be with Jesus, as opposed to rigid rules. I'm going to ask a couple more questions that I want to just learn from you, but I also want to just ask our audience, if you have questions for Kristi, there's a place that you can ask those questions, and we'll try to save room at the very end for just as many as we can get to. But if you have a chance and she's sparking something that you want to know more about, feel free to ask questions. Kristi, you mentioned your mom a minute ago, and one of the things that I love to do with each one of our panelists as we are highlighting and celebrating motherhood, what is one thing that just off the top of your head you learned from your mom?
There's a story that always comes back to me that she always tells me. And my mom and I are opposite, total opposite. She's an introvert. She's not like to be the life of the party. We're just so opposite. So for her, parenting me took a lot of intentionality because she didn't quite probably understand me. I mean, I played all sports. She never played sports. It's just, we're totally different. And when she was talking to my grandfather about me, because my brother was very easy to parent. He's like the rule follower and the like, you know, just tell him what to do and he does it. That was not me. I was like, well, why do I have to do that? What is the reasoning? Why can't we do it this way? And so he said, you're going to have to let her have her head. And she said, what do you mean? And he used to raise horses. And he said, there are some horses that, you know, when you put the reins on, you can guide them the perfect, you know, exactly where you want to go. And they do it. He goes, but there are some horses that you need to loosen up a little bit and let them have their head. They're going to go the same way probably that you want them to go, but you got to let them get there on their own. And so she really did a good job with me in helping me not squelch the free-spirited me and the entrepreneur and the go get it, you know, kind of attitude that she probably was like, that is really scary to me and risky. And I cannot believe you're doing that. But she really helped me, you know, foster that in her own way. So I think she did such a great job in that. And the other thing is no one really realizes this about her, but she's actually very adventurous and a lifelong learner. And so like she's learning Spanish. She's 81.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. She goes to Spanish class. She goes to the nursing home every week to go visit people. You know, she doesn't need the nursing home, but she goes and visits. And so she did a more quiet serving heart. Like we would have people at our house every Thanksgiving who were, you know, refugees. I didn't know what they were called, but it would be all of these people who had just been new to the community from other countries. And it just was way of life. Like she never said like, we're serving and loving because Jesus served and loved. She just did it. And so as I'm looking back, I'm like, wait, that's what she was doing. She's doing what I'm doing now. I just didn't realize it at the time. And so all those things have, now that I'm older, I'm like, wait, I'm doing all those things that she did. And I didn't even realize she was doing it.
That is amazing. And it's so interesting how, you know, our children are not going to be exactly like us. And so having to learn and navigate how to build those relationships, sometimes building bridges, but to allow them to be who God made them to be, I think is so beautiful. And to not try to put them into a box of what we think they should be, but celebrating how we're all wired differently, but it's beautiful. There was something a few weeks ago that I noticed you had written about. And I love your creativity. You are one of the most creative people I know, and I have always admired that about you. But for the parents that are watching right now, what are some practical, tangible ways? And again, we're all coming from different parts of the country, and so states lifting different restrictions. are in play, but we're also entering into summer, which still requires a lot of creativity because our kids are going to be home with us. But you had written about, I think it was over spring break, how you had kind of created a station for your kids to have a virtual spring break. And what does that look like in your home, and how can you encourage the parents that are watching about being creative and also not letting, again, a situation define us, right? We don't want the situation to define us. We want to learn and grow, and we also want to be creative. Okay, this is the hand we're dealt. How do we move forward with joy? How do we choose joy? How are we going to have fun? What does that look like for you? And maybe share that little story of what you did with your kids over spring break.
Sure. Thanks for saying I'm creative. It's funny. That's something I've had to really, those labels that people put on you. I've probably had the label that because my mom wasn't into decorating and all those different things, and I really love that I didn't think I was creative. And different people will say, I'm not really creative because I'm not an artist or this, but we're all creative. I always want to tell people we're all creative in our own ways, whatever that way is. Like sometimes we look on Instagram at a mom that did something amazing with their kids. And I'm like, usually I'm the one that's like, oh my gosh, I will never do that. And I'm okay with that because I send, I have a best friend who's like very creative. She cooks all the time with her kids. Like she makes these extravagant, and that's just not me. So I send my kids over to her house when they want that. I don't have to be that. That's not me. And then she sends her kids over to my house when they want to play sports. Like I stay in my lane. But it has been interesting with the quarantine is that because we are so busy, our kids are in sports, all days a week, and we don't have time to be creative. We haven't had that time. And so I do love it. I do love to be creative and silly and funny. And I think one of the things that I want to help families do is as we go through this quarantine, I'm working on something to help us reflect and say, what did we love about this time? Like for those of us who are privileged enough and blessed enough to be in our home and not be sick, like, what did we love? Like, what do we want to take with us as we come out of this? Like, what are the non-negotiables that we're like, hey, we don't really need all those things in our life. This is what was really important to us. And so the thing you're referring to is we were supposed to go to California for spring break. A lot of people's plans were obviously, not the same as what they should have been. And also in the summer, people are supposed to go on summer vacations. They're not going to be able to do that. And so we decided to make a virtual spring break. And so I honestly just came up with I asked my kids, where are the places that you would want to go if we could go all over the world, where would it be? So every day we went to a different place and we would just look up some different things. Like the first place we went to was Paris. And online there's like you can Google everything. You can have tours at the Louvre, and you can, we had a tour at the Louvre, and then we had canvases and we painted them. And then we had French food that day. And my kids were so creative. Like, a lot of moms are like, I don't have time. I cannot do that. That's too much. And I'm like, you know what? I'm like, you tell your kids, you ask them where they want to go. You give them just a little bit of like, okay, here are some things we could do. And then you give it to them. Mm-hmm. And so my kids, like, they made, the ticket counter. They thought that was so fun for people to come to the ticket counter and get their tickets. And we printed some stuff off. And Carter Mae's like, yeah, that was so fun. And then they made airplanes, and they made, we went to Disney one day and they made like a Disney cantina, and they just did all these fun things that I never even realized how incredibly creative they were, but they had space to do that. And we camped in the living room. We watched we pretended like we went to San Diego and watched the Padres, and we put, camping chairs up, and we had popcorn and concession stand. I mean, the sky's the limit. Like, you can do whatever you want to do, but I just say, ask your kids, like, if you wanted to spend a weekend away, ask your kids where they want to spend that weekend away, and have them come up with something. It's so fun. And we have it on our blog. Like, if you do show notes or anything, I'm happy to share all that with everyone. We had a whole community doing it with us, and they just kind of stole from what we did. And then if they wanted to go to a different place, they would find their own places, but they just kind of took our little stuff, and then they did it with their kids, and they did cooking classes in France. It was so fun.
That's amazing. I do really think you're a very creative person, and I love the ingenuity of coming up with that idea. Just for the people who are listening, Kristi, what are the ages of your kids?
8 little girl and 11 little boy.
Okay. Okay. So you can totally tailor those kinds of ideas with moving up or moving down, whatever the ages of the kids are. Yeah, that's great. You know, one of the things that's really been on my heart in this season, which you kind of referenced, is that I do not want this season wasted. I feel like, and again, I love the word privilege that you said. We are privileged with our health and being home. But, you know, I don't want to come out on the other side and have wasted this season. What are some ways that you feel like that you've learned, or something that God's taught you during the season, that on the other side, you want to be forever changed?
Yeah, I think for me, it's first, I'm going to have like a family meeting with our family and ask them those questions. We did ask the other day, like 1 to 10, how would you rate our family time, or what would you like to do? So I really want to come together with my kids, because they're old enough that I can say, what do we want to take with us? So one thing that we always did before is family dinners. And so that's something that we will take with us. Just being silly and creative, those are things that I'd really like to continue taking with us. We might switch some schooling because we didn't have a lot of time spent. You know, Carter Mae was at school and then gymnastics. Like, we might switch the way that we do schooling a little bit with her. So there's some big things that I think people can take from this time if they just reflect and really write down some of the things that were awesome, and then maybe some of the things that weren't so awesome. And then how can they really change their way of being still, and maybe they were more present during this time. And I've just seen so many stories and memes of like what people are learning, that they were able to stop and really see around them for the first time. And we're not glued to our phones, and, you know, we're not out and about all the time, but we're in with our family, or we're out and about with our family. And so I think there's a lot of things we can learn. I think everything will be different for every family, but for definitely have a conversation with your family as you start to get back into the real world of how you want this to have changed you, and then keep it with you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really good, because I think that I do feel like that there are, while it may be a hard season, there's a lot of things that we can take away. And I feel like that God wants to teach all of us during this season. And so, yeah, how to navigate to move forward and to be forever changed. We've gotten a couple of questions I want to ask you, Kristi, real quick before we run out of time. We have one of our audience members is actually from the UK, and she can relate to you in how you laid everything down before God when he was calling you just to give it all up. Mm-hmm. She too has been in ministry, and she has felt called with a similar situation of God just asking her to lay everything down. And one of her fears, as she poses the question to you, is how do you begin to transition moving back into picking up places of ministry and not falling back into that phase again? And if you have any words of wisdom there, I'll add a couple of maybe words, maybe summing up her question is maybe how to not make ministry an idol, or how to not make ministry define you, as we talked before about getting our identity and accolades. So how do you move forward? Because you're on the other side of that. You laid everything down, and now you started a new business. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think for me specifically, it is making sure that I know that that's probably a struggle for me, and that will always be a struggle for me, and to know my triggers. So I know when I'm feeling like it's too prideful for me, or I know when I'm in over my head with way too much on my plate, and I'm putting those things on my plate because I want people to know how awesome I am, that I can do everything, you know, like I know my triggers. And so for her, as she's coming back in, I would say just be so prayerful of like writing down, what are your triggers? What are those things that make you feel like, ooh, I'm back in that place? And then I would say also make sure you have somebody, a mentor, a friend who can hold you accountable and be very vulnerable with and say, I don't want to get back to this. Help me. If you see me doing these things, would you please tell me, hey, let's talk about this. Are you in over your head? Are you back to the place where you were? And I think if you tell someone and give them permission to ask you those hard questions, I think that's a great thing. And so those are the two things that I really did, is just really prayerful about coming back into this and really coming in slow. Like, I came in and did fitness. Like, my calling was something different. I coached women to wholeness in a whole different way. So you might be coming back into something totally different than what you were doing because God's changed your heart.
That's really good. And I think I can say also, just from personal experience with Passion4Moms, is a willingness to lay it all down, recognizing that it's not about me. And yet, because we live in a culture of putting yourself out there, for lack of a better word, because that's the way to do business. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're constantly putting yourself out on Instagram or to raise awareness of what you're doing. And yet I feel that tension of the prideful part of, I don't like having to market yourself.
Yeah.
But at the same time, walk in obedience and faith of what God's called you to. And also then just that tension of finding your identity, not in comparing of what other people are doing, staying in your lane. Because I think there is a real challenge as we, we see what other people are doing, and it's hard to not compare, but to remain humble that if God took it all away or calls us to lay it all down, that our willingness to do that. We're almost out of time, but Kristi, what would you say is, as you're raising your little world changers, you are obviously being very intentional, that they're difference makers in their world and in their community, and have done a phenomenal job of modeling that for them. But how would you say, for the parents that are listening, what does embracing motherhood as a leader, as a leadership position, why do you think that's important for our world? Why should we esteem the role of motherhood as you are a leader as a mom? What does that look like in your perspective of why is that so important for our world that we view moms as leaders?
Well, I think that probably has a different definition for everyone. And so I always want to say that, because I always feel like sometimes people will look at what I do or what you do, and they're like, that's not how I'm geared. Like, I can't be a leader like that. But I always say everyone is a leader to somebody, whether you're a quiet leader and you're just a leader, not just, you are a leader in your home, or you're a leader to one person. You are all impacting and leading somebody. And so for me, it might be for those kind of like us who have this entrepreneur dream, and they are just scared to step out into it because they're afraid it might change the dynamic at home. And it actually probably will change that dynamic. And that's why you have great conversations with your spouse and your kids. One of the things that has really helped us is that I really try to make our company and what I do, because it does take time, to bring my kids a part of it. And so for us, it's easy, obviously, because it's a family type of thing. And my kids do a lot of things. They video, they take pictures for me. They have a lot of opinions that maybe I don't even want sometimes. But I give them permission to be a part of this. So I think when we're, as moms, whatever we're doing, whether it's a full-time job or whatever, that we just let our family know that why we do this and how important it is to us, and why it, mommy has this creativity and this passion, and this is how she wants to impact the world. And so you're helping her do that by X, Y, and Z. And I think it's so awesome to see our kids see us doing the things that we love, whether it be hard work or, just being gritty. I think, I asked Carter Mae the other day, I said, what are you thinking your goals are? What do you want to be? And she's like, I want to be a mom when I grow up. I'm like, okay, cool. I was like, is there anything else? She's like, nope, just a mom. I'm like, okay. I was in my head, because I'm that doer, whatever. I'm like, oh, but you know, do you want to also be this, this, and this, and this? And she's like, no, I'm just going to be a mom. She's like, I'm going to be a mom. I'm going to take care of my kids, and I'm going to run a company. I mean, that's what mom is to her. Right. So it's different, you know, for everyone. But I think it was just, I loved her just embracing, like, I'm going to do this. And this is how my family rolls. So why wouldn't I do that? So everyone has their own gifts. Everyone has their own leadership. You do not have to do it anyone's way. But I know God has placed a passion and purpose and impact in every single mother's heart. And whatever that be, my dream is that we don't compare. We celebrate. And I always say at the end of our podcast, like, there's no big or small way to love. It's just love. No way is bigger. No way is smaller. It could be in the smallest simple acts that change someone's life. And so please, I always say, don't ever minimize what you are doing as a leader, even if it doesn't look big and bold and, you know, audacious like someone else's does. You're still making an impact. So I just always want to say that to people, and let them know what an impact everyone can make in any situation and whatever they want to do.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that, yeah, and that's one of the reasons that we started this whole webinar series is you don't have to start a company. You don't have to be in ministry. You don't have to have a career or not have a career. It's wherever God has placed you, but recognizing that as a mother, you are impacting the next generation. And so we may have multiple platforms, but to never lose sight of the gifts and image bearers that he has given us to point people to him by being intentional in our homes. And so I just love celebrating the variety of ways that moms have the opportunity to be intentional as leaders to raise up the next generation, because the next generation is going to be largely impacted who they are by what we've invested in them. I mean, it's kind of like you said at the very beginning, some of the labels and the intentionality of what we're speaking over our children is what's going to help raise them up to be strong leaders. And so we have a powerful voice as moms, and so we have a responsibility, but a huge privilege to be leaders as mothers. Well, Kristi, I so appreciate your time. I know that this is a busy season for you. I love you, adore you, think the world of you, and always have. And so I just appreciate your willingness to share what motherhood looks like for you, and about the company that you and Grant have, just being intentional to really model servant leadership so well. Why don't you tell our viewers, just as we wrap up, and I believe we already will have been and will continue to share the links as well, but how they can find your new children's book, because I believe they can go ahead and pre-order that, correct?
Yeah. So the children's book that was based off the whole Lunchbox Note, you can pre-order it at our website. It's BeStrongStory.com and just /book. And yeah, you can pre-order that. And if you pre-order before the 25th, which is when it comes out, you get an autographed copy. We also are giving one of our teaching series. So our coaching, you get a month of coaching. So we give you that family mission, how to make a family mission. So I just break it down in a video, and then I give you our booklet, which is usually something we sell, but our guide booklet that you can sit around the table with your family, and it's literally laid out how to make that family mission so you can live out whatever God has placed on your family's heart. And so those are some of the pre-order goodies if you order now.
That is awesome. Well, Kristi, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you, and I know that our audience has been blessed. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Shaman. I so appreciate you giving me time and loved being with you.
All right. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
And thank you all for joining us. We hope that you will continue to join us every Tuesday, 2:00 Eastern Time. And we look forward to bringing you our next guest next week this time. Have a great day.